Class is now in session. I am Professor Hockey, and today we'll be discussing the game between the Sharks and the Minnesota Wild, in which the Sharks managed to win 3-0. The Sharks now 3-0 in the season series against the Wild, in a 3-game season series against the Wild, so a perfect record, including 2 shutouts, this one tonight 3-0, as well as one previously 4-0. Both at the hands of Martin Jones, and as such, the Sharks seem to have the Minnesota Wild's number, which could bode well for them because Sharks-Wild is a potential first-round playoff match. Sharks currently sit first place in the Pacific Division with this win. The Wild currently sit last wild card spot in the Western Conference, I believe, considering the fact that some other teams lost here tonight. And so if these two teams do meet in the first round, it doesn't mean it's a guaranteed win for the San Jose Sharks, but it does seem like it would probably be the Sharks' most favorable matchup, as they seem to have the Wild's number, and most importantly, Jones seems to have the Wild's number. I talked about the St. Louis Blues game in my last review, saying how it was extremely exciting and it was competitive, back and forth. Both teams were playing pretty well, and in general, it was a playoff type of game. Take all of those adjectives and find the opposite of what they are, and you could use those new words to describe what exactly this game was, because in fact, it was pretty boring, honestly enough. I mean, besides the controversial Logan Couture goal and the hurdle goal, which was quite nice, there really wasn't much else that happened, which was quite surprising when you consider what was at stake for both of these teams, at least mostly for the Wild. You know, the Wild aren't a team that's super far out of a playoff spot. They're not like the Ottawa Senators, and they're basically already mathematically eliminated. No, the Wild are a wild card team, and they're fighting hard for a wild card spot. And so it's somewhat surprising, especially considering the fact that they are the home team, that they'd come out. They didn't even, not necessarily come out so flat, but sort of just play a flat game all around. Meanwhile, the Sharks played a pretty perfect road game, especially since they're in the first half of a back-to-back. They have, a bigger test the next day, and so the Sharks didn't really waste much energy. They still found a way to win, and so it was a solid game all around for the Sharks. And basically, the big key for them was that they got that goal from Barclay Goodrow to take a lead into the third period, because as I've said multiple times, the Sharks have been so good with a lead going into the third period, at least as of late, and they do a great job once again at protecting it and expanding on it to get the 3-0 victory. First thing to talk about would be Martin Jones, as this ended up being his third shutout of the season, his second against the Wild. As I said, he seems to have their number. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Who knows? I thought the first shutout against the Wild was more impressive. I thought he was tasked with making a bunch of fantastic saves in that one, some heroic saves. Here tonight, I thought it was much more of just a solid game. He didn't have to do too much. The Wild did hit a couple of posts that did end up helping him out. But in the first period, where the Wild got the majority of their chances, he was solid enough. He kept the Sharks at the 0-0 tie, giving time for the Sharks to actually get some offense generated in this game against a tough, defensively stingy Wild team. And Jones managed to hold off the Wild in the second and third period, where the chances weren't as frequent as they were in the first period for the Wild, but still existed. And so a solid game all around for Martin Jones. Still impressive to be able to put out a shutout, of course, especially with how scoring is up all around the league. Getting a shutout on any given night against any team is still quite good. Moving on to Jonas Donskoi. I'm not 100% sure what actually occurred with Jonas Donskoi. I've seen some people say that this was some sort of benching, as he wasn't playing very well and hasn't been playing very well. I've seen some people speculate that this is an injury of sorts. I would lean more towards the injury, because I feel like you're on the first half of a back-to-back. If you're up 3-0, I guess you could be sending a message, but let's say in the last 4 minutes, you probably want to play someone like Jonas Donskoi, even if you are benching him, just so you can give some other guys a rest. But in the end, Donskoi is the only player to end up with less than 10 minutes, so my guess would be some sort of injury. We'll see if it's long-term. It would make the decision, once Evander Kane does return from his personal issues, it would make the decision much easier who would come out of the lineup, because Donskoi would already have to come out of the lineup. But it will also be interesting to see if he actually was indeed benched, whether or not once Evander Kane does return, Donskoi will be the one taken out of the lineup in favor of Michael Haley, because at the moment the Sharks on a 5-game winning streak. The fourth line has actually been quite solid for the Sharks. Defensively, they've been sometimes contributing offensively even. Of course, Goodrow did have a goal here tonight, and so if it ain't broke, don't fix it. While I still feel the optimal lineup at the end of the season and going into the playoffs will probably include Donskoi over Michael Haley, it probably wouldn't do too much, it probably wouldn't be that bad to have Donskoi sit in the press box for a couple of games as a healthy scratch. Of course, as I said, it's more likely he was just injured in this game, and we'll see how long that will last. But if he does end up, let's say, being ready to play by the next home game on Thursday, and Evander Kane is also ready to play, it'll be interesting to see what De Boer decides to do. Next, I will talk about the Logan Couture goal. As I said, a controversial goal, probably the most exciting part of this game. Basically, what happened is Logan Couture ends up receiving this puck. He's bobbling it a bit, but he does end up getting this under control near the blue line here. Then he rushes into the zone, ends up getting hooked by Wild defender Boteto, ends up being called a penalty shot, and Logan Couture scores on the penalty shot. And while they're celebrating, Ryan Suter, Wild defenseman, starts discussing with the referees, corresponding here with Bruce Boudreau, and they end up discussing with the NHL, the NHL video review room or whatever, whether or not they can actually challenge this for an offside, and they announce it in the arena that this is not a challengeable play. And so I know a lot of people, or at least I feel like a lot of people might disagree with that, saying that this was a goal that ends up happening because of the fact that this was a penalty drawn on an offside play. Why can't they review that? Well, first of all, technically by the rulebook they can't, so the refs did get it right. The only two situations that you can review for offside are A, if the puck enters the zone and then a goal is scored before the puck is actually exiting the zone, or if a goal is scored on an offside play before all the attacking players manage to exit the zone. That would be situation B where that could occur. Otherwise, there's no other rule in the rule book that is mentioned for where a play could be challenged. So I do understand why it wasn't considered. Now the question would be, should it be a rule? And honestly enough, maybe if this had occurred against the Sharks, I'd have a different opinion, but I don't think this necessarily needs to be a big rule change, because you think about it, and this is a completely separate play, right? A penalty is drawn, sure, on an offside play, and I'm going to say it's offside, even though it's not even necessarily 100% would have been called back if, let's say, a goal was scored right away. This was probably about 50-50. It could have gone either way, but for the sake of this example, I will say, let's say it's an offside play, right? Even if the penalty is taken on an offside play, the penalty shot is a completely separate play that ends up being scored on. I don't know if you should be able to go back. I mean, already the offside rule sort of stretches, what is really in the spirit of the game. The puck entering the zone 30 seconds later, the team scoring while still in the offensive zone and being able to challenge it for offside already seems to be sort of like BS, I guess you could say, but it is technically in the rule book. But I feel like if you do that and you say, well, this was a penalty, so this goal shouldn't have counted, you do open up a whole new can of worms, where what if, let's say, the hooking penalty Couture drew ended up just being a normal penalty and a power play comes out of it, and the Sharks, let's say, win the face-off back to Burns, one-timer, he scores. Is Bruce Boudreau going to challenge that because the penalty shouldn't have originally been called? Or what if the Sharks enter the zone offside, but it's not whistled down, they take a shot, goalie freezes it, face-off stays in the offensive zone, and then immediately off of that offensive zone face-off, they score. Does Bruce Boudreau challenge that because the original play should have been offside, so there should have never been an offensive zone face-off? I feel like there's just so many possibilities, and it's technically possible. You write in the rule book, if a penalty shot is drawn off of an offside breakaway, then you can challenge for offside to see if it's offside. That's technically a rule that could be there, but again, I feel like it would go so far against the spirit of the game, and it's just a completely different play. So I don't think, again, I could have a different opinion if I was, if this was against the Sharks, if this was a Wild penalty shot in this situation, but I feel like it shouldn't be something that should be changed in the rule book. And some people would even maybe compare it to what happened earlier on this season, the Sharks against the Boston Bruins, where the Bruins bat this puck in with a high stick, and some people will say, well, why were you so angry about that, but you're not so angry about this? Well, honestly, the Bruins play leads directly to a goal. I mean, first of all, I'm mostly angry about the fact that the ref somehow misses that this is a high stick above his shoulders, so that should be whistled down, but it also leads directly to a goal. He bats it out of the air and then bats it into the net. If he had batted it out of the air with a high stick and then his shot was saved by Jones and then a whistle is going and there's an offensive zone faceoff and the Bruins then score, I'm not going to argue that the faceoff should have been out of the zone. No, this is a separate play. The whistle is gone. It's a new play. You can't just review something from a previous play, and that's basically where I stand here for the penalty shot. The penalty shot and the penalty itself are two separate plays, so you should not be able to challenge a penalty that should have been called back for the offside. That will do it for this review. However, the Sharks will be back in action tomorrow. They'll face off against the Winnipeg Jets in Winnipeg. The Sharks' first matchup against the Jets was a 5-3 loss, but the Sharks did play well in that game. Their second matchup against the Jets was a 3-2 overtime victory, and as such, this third and final deciding game in the season series versus the Jets, still a very important game, going to be a tough one as well. Of course, the Jets are one of the better teams in the Western Conference, and the Sharks were going to look to keep distance from the Calgary Flames for that first place spot in the Pacific Division that they did get back with tonight's 2 points. Class dismissed.